on board with actually putting in whatever laws need to be put in order to cap those emissions, that's another step. So for me, COP28 is a great place to make the announcements and set the targets, but I'm very interested in the action afterwards. So will we actually reach those targets by implementing what we need to cap those emissions?
Absolutely. And, it's a very important issue. And not only does climate change have a negative impact on property, with flooding and wildfires and
Mhm.
storm events, but has a negative impact on individual health as well. And this was the first year that health and health adaptations were specifically discussed at COP this past Sunday. And I was just wondering, what was your reaction to that? And do you feel that's an encouraging sign that people are moving more towards focusing on the individual adaptations and the individual health impacts?
I think it was such a great advance to be speaking about health on the main stage because, as you just mentioned, when we think about flooding, we think about a flooded basement or a home that's been washed away. When we think about wildfire, it's similar. We think of a home burning down, communities being displaced. But with climate change, we're just now starting to talk about the health effects, which are actually major and fairly difficult to track and know, okay, how many deaths per year are occurring just due to the effects of climate change. But there have been reports that have even come out now in Canada saying that hospitals are already seeing an increase of patients being admitted due to climate change related effects. So whether that's more extreme heat that we wouldn't have had in the past or inhalation of wildfire smoke, whatever those things are, they're seeing an increase in patients that are coming into the hospitals, and hospitals will not have enough space or staff to be able to manage the health effects that extreme weather is having on human beings. And we haven't even talked about mental health impacts, but absolutely, there's an effect there as well.
Yes, I'm very glad that you mentioned the mental health impacts because I will be asking about it in a moment. But first, let's talk a little bit about the physical impacts because, this summer, I think, is still fresh in everyone's mind. It was a historic season for wildfires, worst on record by a lot. And you mentioned, some of those health effects, smoke inhalation. Of course, there was also the heat that went along with this past summer. And what were some of the ways that you can recommend that people, if this happens again this coming summer with more wildfires, what are some of the ways that people can adapt to that?
So first, I would say I like that you're saying, what if this happens again? It's very likely that it will happen again. Maybe not this summer, maybe not the next one, but it will in 2 years and 3 years, 4 years. So do prepare ahead of time. Know that our risk as a country is increasing across the board due to the effects of climate change. So with that being said, there are many different things that people can do to prepare ahead of time. So if you are worried about wildfire reaching your home, make sure to clear out any sort of debris around your home that could ignite. But if you're more thinking about just health impacts, well, first of all, the population that is most impacted by wildfire smoke and extreme heat are the most vulnerable. So we're looking at the elderly, pregnant people, young children, anybody that works outdoors. But in extreme and very, very extreme heat events, so even like when they last a few days, or the wildfire smoke that we saw this summer, which blanketed most of Canada, northern United States, everybody's actually at risk. So the first thing that you should do is really reduce how much time you're spending outside, which it sounds like a bummer, and I know, but there are communities that have actually had to spend an entire summer inside of their home because they had wildfire burning for the whole summer. So think about that first and then protect your indoor air. So only open the windows when absolutely necessary, when maybe the smoke has gone down a little bit, or same with the extreme heat, and install air filters. And that will really help with any air that's coming in from outside and getting those like really small particles that can enter your lungs and your the bloodstream as well. So it's about keeping the smoke out and keeping the heat out, for example. So for both, what you can do is just install like weather strips around your windows and your doors and make sure that they're securely locked and nothing can come in. And yeah, so just purify your air as much as possible.
And just speaking of the heat, this summer, I believe you and the center were calling for cooling as a human right. What was the reaction to that call? And are we starting to see governments react on a macro level in terms of providing more cooling centers, providing masks or spaces where you can get clean air. What was the reaction to your call for cooling as a human right? And are we seeing again more reaction from governments to help people adapt?
So we received a lot of attention for saying that actually. And just to be clear, as you mentioned, access to cooling means all of those things. So not just having air conditioning in your home, because that's just not realistic for everybody because of the type of buildings that people live in or even just affordability. So access to cooling means that exactly that there's a cooling center nearby, that you know where to go, that you have masks available. So what we're seeing though is really the governments that have started to implement some of the measures are the ones that have suffered the most already from extreme heat or wildfire. So for example, BC has already had a program where they are handing out air conditioners to the people that can install them in their home because BC did have the heat dome occur in 2021, which killed 619 people. So that woke them up and they're ready to go. But we know very well that many of the larger urban centers of Canada are at very high risk of extreme heat. So this should be something that's implemented across the big cities. So we're seeing some changes occur, but really until an event occurs in a city, it doesn't wake up our government as much as we would like it to. But just to mention, if you are a resident and you're thinking, okay, my government's not doing anything about it right now, think about the things that you can do around your home to improve the cooling. So if you're in a non-wildfire prone area, you can just install some greenery around your home, whether that's planting trees or shrubs, anything that will help just kind of absorb that heat and provide some shade around your home.
Now, I also live in a part of Ontario that's historically seen a lot of flooding over the past few springs and early summers. Are there any sort of adaptations that people can do in response if they're in a flood prone area?
Yeah, absolutely. And you said you live in like a flood prone area, and really most of Canada is flood prone, if not all of Canada, because whether you are on the floodplain, as it's called, where it's prone to flooding or not, we're increasingly seeing these extreme rainfall events. So that could occur pretty much across the board in Canada. And due to our pavements and areas that are not soaking up the water, we're all at risk of flooding. So there's so much that people can do at the home level. And this starts from like low or no cost options to low cost options to higher upgrades. Right now, something you can do this weekend as you're kind of preparing for the winter before it gets too cold, you can just clean out your eaves troughs, for example. So that's something that people don't think about. Just maintaining that will help that water flow. Or a bit of like a more simple upgrade is just extending your downspouts outside of your home. That will already get the water away from your foundation and your basement and protect your home a bit better. And if you have the space, the time, and funds, you could also install a rain garden. And the rain garden will act as a sponge when a rain event occurs, but it's also great for extreme heat as well. So it also absorbs some of the heat and provides a cooling environment around your home.
Fantastic. And just to revisit that question that we mentioned earlier about the mental health effects of climate change, the Canadian Climate Institute this summer released a study that said 3 out of 4 Canadians experience some level of climate anxiety. And I mean, I know a few people in my life who are younger who are thinking of not starting a family because they don't know what kind of future there will be for their kids. So, how can people adapt to climate anxiety? What can you do about this feeling of, it can be overwhelming. It's a huge macro global issue. How can an individual help cope with that sort of existential dread that they can get from climate anxiety?
I think how you used adapt to the anxiety works so well for my line of work because that's what keeps me hopeful is adaptation. So climate is a monster of a problem and it needs to be solved globally, and everybody needs to be on board to slow down climate change. But with that thought also goes, well, what can I do? What can I do for my neighbors, for myself, for my community in the meantime?